Everyone talks about Wanda Maximoff like she's a victim, and in many ways she is. She lost her family, she lost vision, she lost any sense of a normal life before she ever had the chance to choose one. So when people watch her story, they don't ask whether she was right or wrong, they ask how much pain she's been through. And that pain feels real, it feels human, it feels justified. But here's the uncomfortable question we almost never ask. At what point does suffering stop being an explanation and start becoming an excuse? Because Wanda didn't just lose control, she took it. She didn't just break down, she built a world where no one else had a choice. And the more you look at what she did, the harder it becomes to call her actions harmless. This isn't a video about hating Wanda. It's not about denying her trauma. It's about something far more unsettling. What happens when someone we deeply sympathize with crosses a line, and we choose not to notice? Because the most dangerous characters in these stories aren't always the ones we fear. They're the ones we understand. And that's exactly why Wanda Maximoff might be one of the most morally complicated characters the MCU has ever created. It's easy to understand why people see Wanda Maximoff as innocent. Her story is built on loss. Not small loss, not temporary loss, but the kind that keeps stacking until there's nothing left to stand on. She loses her parents, then her home, then her brother. And just when she finally allows herself to love again, she's forced to kill Vision with her own hands, only to watch him die again seconds later. Trauma isn't a footnote in Wanda's story. It's the foundation, and the MCU encourages that perspective. We meet Wanda as a victim long before we see her as a threat. She's experimented on, used as a weapon, manipulated by forces far bigger than her. Even when she fights back, it's framed as survival, not aggression. So naturally, audiences learn to protect her in their minds, to excuse her, to say, of course she broke, anyone would. WandaVision pushes that even further. The show doesn't start with violence. It starts with grief, with loneliness, with a woman trying to cope in the only way she knows how. The sitcom reality feels harmless at first, almost comforting, and that's important, because it mirrors how we process Wanda herself. We focus on her pain so much that we stop questioning the cost of her coping mechanisms. And that's the key reason Wanda is rarely judged the same way other characters are. Her suffering is visible. Her emotions are relatable. Her breakdown feels earned. So instead of asking whether her actions were right, we ask whether they were understandable. And understanding slowly replaces accountability. But sympathy has a dangerous side, because once we decide someone is a victim, we hesitate to hold them responsible. We soften our language. We avoid moral conclusions. We say things like, she didn't mean to, or she had no choice. And before we realize it, we've stopped analyzing her actions at all. We've decided that pain automatically grants innocence. And that belief is exactly what makes Wanda's story so complicated. Because if grief alone is enough to erase responsibility, then where does the line actually exist? And more importantly, what happens when someone crosses it? At some point, Wanda's story stops being about grief and starts being about control. What she creates in Westview isn't just an emotional escape or a harmless fantasy. It's a fully constructed reality built on the removal of choice. Thousands of people wake up every day trapped inside a life they didn't consent to, smiling, laughing, and suffering on command, while their thoughts, bodies, and memories are bent to serve someone else's need for comfort. This is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable because Wanda doesn't simply lose control in a moment of chaos. She maintains it. The hex doesn't exist for a few seconds or a single outburst. It continues. It adapts. It grows more complex the longer it's sustained. And sustaining it requires intention. It requires energy. It requires repetition. Which means that at some level, Wanda is choosing to keep it alive, even as the cost becomes impossible to ignore. The people of Westview aren't abstract victims. They feel everything. They experience her grief, her fear, her longing, and her denial all at once without any escape. Their pain isn't accidental, it's a byproduct of a system that only works if they remain imprisoned. Wanda's healing depends on their suffering, and that's the moment where sympathy begins to fracture. What makes this even harder to defend is that Wanda isn't unaware. She hears the cracks in her world. She senses resistance. She sees fear behind the forced smiles. Characters confront her. Warnings are given. The illusion is challenged, and yet, instead of stepping back, she doubles down. She expands the hex. She reinforces the walls. She chooses preservation over release. This is the moral line she crosses. Not because she's grieving, but because she prioritizes her pain over everyone else's autonomy. Trauma may explain why the hex exists, but it doesn't justify why it continues. At some point, grief stops being something that happens to Wanda and becomes something she uses to reshape the world around her. And that's the shift that changes everything. Because once someone knowingly removes the freedom of others to protect their own emotional stability, the conversation is no longer about victimhood. It's about responsibility. And Wanda doesn't cross that line by accident. She crosses it slowly, consciously, and repeatedly until the damage becomes the foundation of her new reality. The most important detail in Wanda's story is often the one people try to minimize. Wanda becomes aware. This isn't a situation where she remains ignorant of the harm she's causing until the very end. The truth reaches her slowly, but clearly. She hears the voices of the people trapped inside her world. She sees their fear. She's confronted by outsiders who tell her exactly what's happening. And for a brief moment, she understands. That moment matters because morality doesn't begin with intention. It begins with awareness. Once Wanda realizes that her grief has turned into a prison for others, the story changes. From that point on, every second the Hex continues to exist is no longer an accident. It's a decision. And Wanda doesn't immediately let it go. She hesitates. She resists. She chooses to protect the illusion rather than face the pain waiting for her outside of it. This is where Wanda fundamentally separates herself from characters who truly lose control. She has opportunities to stop. She's given warnings. She's shown the consequences. And instead of releasing her grip, she strengthens it. She expands the Hex. She reinforces the barrier. She pushes back against anyone who threatens the reality she's built. Not because she doesn't understand the harm, but because she isn't ready to accept the loss. And that choice is what defines her. Wanda isn't acting in a vacuum. She's responding to reality with full knowledge of the cost. Her pain doesn't blind her anymore, it motivates her. She understands that people are suffering, and she allows it to continue, because ending it would mean confronting her grief without control, without power, and without the comfort of illusion. This is the moment where sympathy alone stops being enough. Because once awareness enters the equation, innocence disappears. Wanda may still be tragic. She may still be understandable, but she is no longer blameless. Her actions now exist in a space where harm is known, consent is absent, and power is actively being used to override the freedom of others. And that's the point where Wanda's story stops being just a story about loss. It becomes a story about responsibility. Not the responsibility to never break, but the responsibility to stop, when breaking others becomes the price of holding yourself together. Wanda Maximoff is tragic. She's sympathetic, she's human, but she's also responsible. The line she crossed wasn't invisible or accidental. She chose control over other people, she chose comfort over facing reality, and she allowed harm to happen even when she knew it. That doesn't make her evil in the classic sense, but it does make her morally complicated. And that's exactly why her story sticks with us. So now it's your turn. What do you think? Was Wanda a villain or just someone who made really bad choices? Drop a comment and tell me honestly. There's no wrong answer, just your opinion. I want to see what you think. And if you enjoy these character breakdowns, hit subscribe to see more videos about characters who aren't always what they seem.